Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Automate IT Processes, where we talk about operational efficiency and how it meets digital transformation needs. This event is brought to you in partnership with Rubrik and produced by Actual Tech Media. Thank you so much for joining us on the webinar. We've got some really awesome content lined up for you today, all around IT process automation. I know this is a topic that's near and dear to a lot of us out there in the world of enterprise IT. We need greater efficiency. We need to get rid of complexity. And the way to do that is, in most cases, through automation. Before we introduce you to our expert presenter, just a few things that you should know about the webinar today. First off, my name is David Davis. I'll be serving as the moderator. We want this to be educational and we encourage your questions. We'll be doing a Q&A session at the end of the presentation today, so get your questions in early there using the questions tab. I see that many of you have already found it. We, of course, welcome your greetings and hellos from across the United States and around the world, but we also want to help you to solve your automation challenges. So bring us your technical questions and we're here to help. We also have a handout there in the handouts tab. It is a full ebook. It's the Guerrilla Guide to Backup and Recovery Best Practices. Make sure that you check out that ebook. Go ahead and download it now and you can read it after the event. Again, it's a full-length ebook and it has additional information on automation, but also, a lot of other topics that are really important today when it comes to securing data in your infrastructure, modernizing IT, preparing for new workloads, and of course, automating IT processes. And then finally, at the end of the webinar today, I'll be announcing the winner of our Amazon $300 gift card. If you're watching this on demand, of course, the drawing has already occurred. The prize terms and conditions can be found there in the handouts tab. And then new for this year, we started our best question prize for another $50 Amazon gift card. The prize winner will be selected after the event. Actual Tech Media prize policies are, of course, there in the handouts tab as well. Winners must submit an IRS form W-9 to Actual Tech Media. And with that, I'm excited now to introduce you to our expert presenter. Welcome, Mr. Mike Preston, Technical Marketing Engineer at Rubrik. Mike, it's great to have you on.
Perfect. Thanks, David. Hi, everybody, and thanks so much for joining. And, today we're really going to talk about something that's near and dear to my heart. Like David mentioned, it's near and dear to a lot of people, and that's basically automation. Briefly about myself, so you know who's going to be, blabbing at you for the next hour or so. My name is Mike Preston, and I've been working at Rubrik for just about 3 years. Most recently, I've been in the developer relations space as a developer advocate within the tech marketing department. But perhaps sort of more applicable is before I joined Rubrik, I spent roughly 20 years in the partner and customer space, most of the time in the customer space. I was what you call a systems analyst for a local school board here. And basically there was a group of about 4 of us, which essentially supported nearly every single thing that plugs into a wall. So, we managed Active Directory for about 15,000 students, 2,000 staff. We managed all the virtualization deployments, the physical infrastructure, the data centers, the switching, the networking. We were DBAs. We supported all the applications. And if there's anybody here that works in education, as far as application count goes, it's probably one of the highest. I mean, there was close to 1,000, I think. So automation really played a key role in how we did our jobs. And without it, there's no way we'd be able to stay afloat, especially with, just 4 of us looking after all that. So with that, I want to talk a little bit about how the presentation is going to go today. So I first want to talk a bit about why we even need to automate at all. We kind of hinted at it there. Then I'll move into how Rubrik can help with those automation strategies. And then we'll talk about APIs and automation and different use cases that Rubrik fits into. From there, we'll jump into a demo where I'll show you one of those use cases. Today, I chose backup validation. And then we'll move into how you can get started automating different things yourself, and we'll wrap up and have a Q&A. So Let's talk a little bit about why we even automate it all, right? Why do we go through the trouble? And honestly, this used to be a struggle in my mind. Why would I spend, half a day building some process that I can just complete manually, within an hour? And, first, I want to say things like these manual configurations, one-off scripts, gold templates, things like that. Why these things all have benefits. Ultimately, when we look to repeat some of these things, they'll result in failure. And they fail really because, of some of the following reasons, right? Number one, things like manual configs really don't give us the consistency that we need within our environments. Looking back to my days at the school board, I remember we were first introducing VMware out into our schools. So I automated the build of all the ESXi servers, as well as the builds of all the applications that ran on top, right? Things like monitoring servers, application servers, Active Directory, things like that. And by doing this, I was really able to deploy a consistent environment, which ultimately meant, my environment is essentially more reliable and ultimately more available. As far as legacy tools and proprietary CLIs go, they really offer no interoperability. One of the biggest advantages of automation and APIs is really that standardized access, right? The ability to take what, once were disparate applications and stitch them together and make them talk to each other, right? And legacy tools really can't live up and deliver this for us. And then finally, we get compromised security. And that's for when we use things like gold templates. And I'm guilty of this as well. They're often not updated. And that just leaves gaping security holes, which are deployed, over and over and over and over again in our environment. So, these are sort of some of the things, where, manual processes kind of, is not the greatest thing. But essentially, the biggest problem is it just takes up too much time. And, doing this stuff manually uses, a lot of different resources that we could use for other, business-centric projects. So the thing is, time, in these days is really something that we don't have. Like I said, we had 4 people managing pretty much everything for roughly 17,000 users spread across, maybe 50 buildings using 1,000 applications. And even with automation in place, we really didn't have a whole lot of time. And our data centers today are, they're more spread out than ever. We have infrastructure running on premises in multiple buildings. We're utilizing cloud and SaaS and PaaS and all this new stuff to power all of our workloads. And on top of all that, we have all of these different applications and hypervisors and databases and operating systems that we have to support. And then on top of that, we're expected to, deploy and monitor and protect and secure and manage all these things on a day-to-day basis, which is really why we need to leverage automation to handle portions, if not all, of these, crazy expectations we in IT, have to deliver. So when I move into this, I want to talk a bit about how Rubrik can help out with that, because you might be thinking, how can a backup product or a data management solution help push me along my automation journey and help secure and protect my environment? And to talk about this, I really want to, talk a little bit about how Rubrik is laid out. So Rubrik's architected in such a way that automation and modernization sit at the core of our solution. And there's really 4 main components that support this. So the first is SLA automation. What I mean by this is with Rubrik, we replace sort of that legacy approach of having thousands of jobs, which all do different things, and collapse them into a few policies, that can be applied to all of our workloads. And I'll go deeper into this in a few slides, but just know we take a policy-based approach to data management rather than, the risky job-based approach. The second is really how we recover. We're designed to recover quickly, very quickly, in fact. We provide, a global search across our entire environment and allow for one quick click recovery to provide, a near instantaneous restore. And thirdly, and more prominent for today, is going to be our approach to APIs. APIs within the Rubrik solution are a first-class citizen, and basically everything within Rubrik can be automated by calling an underlying API. And this opens the doors for, endless use cases for our customers. And then, of course, we have security. Once data is written within the Rubrik platform, it can never be changed. We call this immutability. And this is how our customers are able to quickly recover from things like ransomware and malicious activity. You can always be sure that your data is able to be recovered with Rubrik. So let's dive into modernization and automation a little further, and I'll start with our modern approach to data protection. So one of the main reasons behind our success within this market has been that data protection, for the most part, has been somewhat stagnant, right? We have decades of old code that's deployed in a very complex architecture consisting of a number of different hardware and software components, right? And it really requires a lot of personnel time and resources to keep this stuff up and running. Now, Rubrik modernizes this architecture by collapsing things like media servers and storage, proxies and servers, and all of this stuff into a single software fabric that scales out indefinitely to provide data protection, both on premises as well as up in the cloud. We also hear from our customers that are utilizing legacy solutions that, they're really not able to stay compliant with their recovery objectives. And often, legacy tends to require multiple steps to recover. Now, I've been in this recovery situation, and I'm sure y'all have as well, where you have 5 or 6 people hanging over your shoulder, wondering if they can access their data and workloads. And it's not fun to say things like, "Oh, I'm on step 3 of 7," or something like that. Rubrik provides that global search that we mentioned, so you can quickly locate, what you need to recover across your environment, easily pick the desired restore point, and then simply provide the ability to do what we call a live mount or instant recovery. So our recovery methods mount your VMs and your databases to your production resources, but they use the Rubrik platform as the underlying storage. So basically, we're running our applications directly from the backup files themselves. And what this means is we can recover in about the same amount of time that it takes you to boot up that operating system. So we'll get rid of those people that are essentially hanging over your shoulders. And then finally, it's usually all about money as well. Legacy's gotten costly, right? We have things like hardware upgrades and maintenance and forklift upgrades and all of that stuff, as well as all the personnel costs that we need to incur to maintain some of these archaic solutions. Our customers really can expect to recover roughly 70 to 90% of their operational or administrative time when they move off of a legacy system. And in general, that saves roughly 40 to 50% of total hardware costs as well. So the key is modernizing your solution to something like Rubrik can really provide great cost benefits. So let's dive into now to that SLA automation that I mentioned earlier and our policy-based protection. So this is a huge driver really of those OpEx savings that we just talked about. Managing legacy often requires multiple jobs for multiple protected objects. So what I mean by this is, we go and negotiate with different app owners when we can schedule backups, and then we set up jobs to do the backups, jobs to do the cataloging, jobs to go and do the replication and do the archival. And then often, these jobs need to be duplicated or created separately depending on what workload is being protected. And we've worked with customers that have as many as 3,000 jobs within their environment, and they're all chained together. And, when one portion fails, the whole process fails and needs to be restarted. With Rubrik, we really take all of those jobs, and reduce them into a handful of what we call SLAs. And here's how an SLA works. Firstly, we simply input how often we want to back up and how long we want to keep those backups around. So think maybe I want to take a backup every 4 hours, keep it for a day. I also want to take a daily, keep it for a week, a weekly for a month, and so on and so forth. And Rubrik just goes out and starts scheduling, everything with its intelligent task scheduler to go ahead and make sure we're staying compliant with that. The next thing that goes into an SLA domain is archival. So what archival does is it gives you the ability to take backups off the end of the chain and essentially migrate them off of the Rubrik platform. and then move them to, some maybe cheaper or more cost-effective storage. So think, AWS S3 or Glacier or Azure, GCP, as well as, on-prem NFS, if that's what you want to do as well. So this is often a replacement for things like tape, right, which can be a bit of a pain to manage as well. And finally, the last thing we put into an SLA domain is replication. And replication's kind of just like archival. However, instead of processing backups off, the end of the chain, those older backups, it processes backups from the beginning of the chain. So you might want to take maybe the 5 most recent backups that you have, and maybe we want to replicate them to another Rubrik cluster, that's sitting at a different location. That way, if we completely lose a whole location, we have the ability to recover these workloads at another location. And, it's basically those 4 things that get applied into an SLA, and the SLAs are simply applied to any object after that, right? There's no need to create separate policies for different workload types, right? Meaning the same SLA that you apply to a VMware VM can be applied to Hyper-V or AHV, physical Windows, Linux, SQL, Oracle, or even instances that you have running up in the cloud like Azure VMs or AWS EC2. You simply set it and forget it, and just kind of let Rubrik handle everything after that. Now, we kind of have an understanding of some what I like to call internal automation that Rubrik provides with SLA domain policies and things like that. I really want to move into how we support the automation of IT processes now. So this is going to be more of the external automation, which we're all used to. So first, data protection is really just part of, what you do to keep everything up and running. And it really shouldn't just live on its own island. And this is why we built this platform to be what we call API first. And what this means is that everything that we can do within the Rubrik UI can also be achieved by consuming an underlying API endpoint. And it's these APIs that really support all of the hype that we have around automating with Rubrik. Now, you might be thinking, well, my solution has an API, and honestly, a lot of vendors do, right? A lot of vendors also claim to be API first, and some are. Like I mentioned, I spent 20 years in the customer space, and during that time, I've seen some really, really good API approaches, but for the most part, a lot of them have been really, really bad. So I really want to talk for a minute about why Rubrik's different. Why does Rubrik fall into that good category? The first thing is, we're full feature. As I mentioned, everything you could do within the Rubrik UI can also be automated by, consuming an API endpoint. And I mean everything, right? In fact, our UI really just calls the API itself. And essentially that makes us customer zero in a sense. If the API is broke or an API is missing or our UI is broke or some feature doesn't work, basically our UI is going to be broke as well. So this is why our engineers really have strict requirements around always ensuring that an API accompanies any functionality that they build. So what this means as a customer is you can essentially automate anything that Rubrik does. Now, I've seen many vendors that treat APIs as somewhat of a bolt-on product, right? Or it was developed after the fact. And, while it may help you automate some portions, often pieces are missing and you can only get 70% of the way there, right? Our founders experienced this as well, which is why they prioritize the API from the get-go. Secondly, and perhaps, one of the most important things, in my opinion, is the resources and the documentation that we put behind our APIs. I've dealt with vendors that simply say, yep, we have an API, and you go back and you ask for documentation, and they send you some link to something that's just thrown up on the web, and the documentation's either incomplete or outdated, and basically that makes it essentially useless, right? APIs are great, but as you may know, there's something that really needs to be documented thoroughly in order to be fully utilized, right? You can't simply guess, what endpoint URIs are, or query parameters, or what's supposed to go into the body of the request. With Rubrik, our docs are built right into the product, which makes it super easy for you to get started and build different things yourself, even if you have zero REST API knowledge, to start with. So we provide several resources, such as detailed and interactive documentation. We have a ton of sample code snippets inside there as well, and example use cases, and even an API Explorer, which you can interface with the API without the need to even know any code or form these bodies yourself. It's just simply little input boxes where you answer questions. I want to get information about this VM. Here's the information I want to get. You click submit, and it will return what the request and the response is supposed to look like, and you can go ahead and copy that into your tool of choice. Now, as the product's updated, obviously, since those API docs are built in, all those supporting documentation is updated right along with it as well. So you always have the most current documentation on the Rubrik cluster. And lastly, the third difference of why our APIs fall into that great category is integration points, right? These allow you to start utilizing our APIs and automating things right out of the box. So we have a dedicated team of experts that provide a ton of pre-built integrations with some of the most popular sort of automation providers that are out there today. So if we want to take a look at some of those integration points, they can really be broken up into a few different categories. So we have support for ITSMs, right? Those looking to provide self-service. So Rubrik can easily be integrated into things like ServiceNow or vRealize automation. And what that does is it allows you to, sort of merge those data protection workflows in with your self-service workflows. So think of a user being able to deploy a VM and you saying, oh, I'm requiring you to select an SLA domain at the same time. So all of a sudden data protection isn't an afterthought for them. Before it can be provisioned, it has to be protected. Or even providing, self-service recovery to your end users. So they can go ahead and select the workloads that they have, and without leaving ServiceNow or VRA, they can search for certain files that they need to recover and actually recover these themselves. So they're not, bugging you anymore. On top of that, we have our SDKs, right? So maybe you're super proficient in PowerShell, or, you're a Python person and you just want to, get on the ground running. Just simply download our SDK, and you can start developing around Rubrik. The automation tools, maybe you don't really know Python, but you're very, very proficient in Ansible. You spend your days in Ansible, running playbooks. This is really where our automation and integration tools come into play. We provide plugins for config management tools like Ansible and Puppet and Salt and Chef, along with infrastructure as code tools like Terraform. And most all of these tools are open source and freely available to you. And then we have our cloud management. Depending on how you set up Rubrik, if you're utilizing archive to the cloud, then you need to obviously deploy and provision an S3 bucket or a Glacier, some Glacier storage. We have, CloudFormation templates that apply our security best practices that you can automate, the creation of all those cloud resources, as well as, use Terraform or something to go ahead and automate the creation of those within Rubrik as well. So how our customers are leveraging, some of this stuff. I'm not going to go through all of these, but, I'll highlight a few. Certainly integrating data protection into their current automation tool sets with our pre-built integrations. That's a big one. We have customers leveraging our APIs to pull data and metrics from Rubrik and place that into some sort of centralized monitoring solution. Think like Splunk. Certainly automating IT operations at scale is a big one. There's a great session. I don't know how many of you know, but we have what we call Rubrik Forward, which is our big conference every year. It's coming up actually on the 18th to the 20th of May. So make sure you register. But last year we had the Home Depot come and they talked about how they automated the complete process of deploying Rubrik Edge. So Rubrik Edge is essentially our our virtual appliance that we've built in order for those organizations that have a lot of remote offices that they need to protect. So the Home Depot talked a lot about how they automated that complete workflow of deploying Edge out to their 2,200 plus stores. And, it involved a lot of different stuff, all the way from the configuration to even registering, the Edge deployment that they had on the Rubrik support portal. So there's even APIs on our support portal that facilitate the registration. So I definitely recommend you guys checking that out if you have some spare time. You can find it on forward.rubrik.com. Also, we have a number of different use case and case studies up on Rubrik.com if you want to check them out. This one in particular involves an IT services provider who chose Rubrik simply because of our Ansible integration, right? They currently use Ansible to deploy their storage with Pure Storage and network with Cisco. And Rubrik really slid kind of right into that workflow, allowing them to take, what was once, a fragmented workflow and a number of different scripts, and simplify, the deployment of their complete stack of network storage and backup into a single efficient workflow. And I did mention that most of our integrations are open source, which is important, especially to me working in DevRel. This is a quote from one of our customers that started using our PowerShell module. So, they were a fairly new customer and they wanted to do some PowerShell stuff. They pulled down our PowerShell module and they quickly realized, there was some functionality that they wanted to perform that we didn't quite have in the module yet. Well, since it is open source and we do accept, contributions, they could pull down our contributor guide and they were easily able to, build it themselves. And rather than have to wait, on an engineering team or someone like that to build it, they submitted 8 new commandlets into the module. These were reviewed, edited, and merged into the module within a few short days. And, now they're available for all of our customers to use. So that's really I like to highlight sort of the importance of open source and the importance of sort of coding as a community. I think it's a nice sort of thing. So with that, I want to jump into the actual demo. And today what we're gonna show off is how we automate the function of backup validation. Basically, how we can automate ensuring that our backups are going to be able to be restored when we actually need to restore them, rather than find out the hard way that maybe they're not. Now, before I jump right into the code, I do quickly want to go over why we would want to do this, right? And why this process really should be automated. Firstly, backups easy, right? We get a copy of the data. That's really the easy part. But when it comes time to restore, if that process fails, then all of those backups that we've done, they're essentially worthless. So it's really important that we validate the recoverability of our backups, right? Allowing us to ensure that we'll be able to recover those critical services and validate, essentially that our DR plans will actually be able to succeed, when we need them to. And traditionally, validation of backups involves a manual restore, then we jump into that application, we test a few things, and this can be really super tedious, and it's not the most exciting thing to do. But this process with Rubrik can be completely automated, so why wouldn't we just automate it? So let's talk a little bit about what the Rubrik backup validation use case actually does, sort of how it's laid out. Well, number one, it's going to automate that validation backup process for us. It utilizes our live mount functionality, which means we don't have to wait for the data to traverse the network, and we won't consume valuable production storage during the process. So the whole process really just utilizes a few different PowerShell modules, and it's completely configurable with a few different JSON-based config files. So what's actually going to happen here during the demo? We have the user, right? That's going to be us. Most often, you're probably not going to, trigger this PowerShell script off, manually as a user. You'll add it to task scheduler, you build some sort of cron job or something to trigger this off. But essentially, we have a user. They're going to go ahead and kick off the build.ps1 script, which we'll go through. That script will then, read the configuration files. And within the configuration files, we store things like, obviously what VMs do we want to validate the backups for, what backups, credentials to things like vCenter, to Rubrik, as well as credentials into the guest OS. Those credentials are stored encrypted using the export CLI XML command. So they're only, can be, decrypted by the same user on that system. So it's going to pull in, all of this configuration. Code's going to simply execute at that point. And the first thing that's going to happen is, a live mount's going to get requested from the Rubrik platform. So the live mount process will then call the proper VMware APIs to map an NFS data store, which resides on the Rubrik platform, to vCenter, right? And then it's going to create a VM directly from the backup files on Rubrik. Then there's going to be some PowerShell that's going to go ahead and configure that VM, right? So we're going to make sure, that it adheres to what we set up within that JSON config. So things like, what virtual network is it going to be attached to? Do we want to re-IP that virtual machine if it's going into, maybe you have a test VLAN or something like that? And then after that, we're just going to run a number of tests against that recovered point in time. So there's a number of built-in tests like ping and net logon, and testing for the availability of a certain service. But you can also write your own, right? This is just PowerShell. So if you want to write your own tests, that's completely cool as well. If you have something unique within your environment, which most people do. From there, we simply send the output back to the user, hopefully saying everything's good. This VM is going to be able to be restored. And then after it's done, the whole thing gets cleaned up, because obviously we don't want to leave a live mount laying around if we don't have to. And we're done. So with that, I think that's enough talking about the process. Let's jump in and actually have a look at how it works. All right, so the first thing I want to show you is Rubrik Build, basically our community where everything can be downloaded. So again, like I said, it's split up into all of these different categories: our SDKs, our tooling integrations, and then use cases are really something that can accomplish a specific task. So we can see backup validation with PowerShell there. This is the use case we're going to walk through. And as I mentioned, we provide documentation around everything. Each and every project that goes up onto Rubrik Build is full of things like quick start guides and quick start videos. We want to make a really, really low barrier to entry to using this stuff. So if we look at the quick start guide briefly for the backup validation here, we can see the prerequisites, what we need to do to install it, all the different components, what they do, what the configuration files need to look like, and basically how to run it. So it's basically step-by-step instructions on what you need to do to get up and running. So I'll jump into the code because I've already pulled everything down here. And the first thing is we have a couple different configuration files. The first one's going to be the main config, which is outlining, what we want to test. I only have one VM in here, but if you had a 3-tier app, you could definitely add 3 virtual machines in here, or as many as you wanted to. The backup validation does run the tests in parallel as well, so you don't have to wait for one to finish before the next one's done. So as we see here, I'm just giving it a VM name. So this Preston Win is the virtual machine that I want to test. I'm defining what I want that live mount to be called. I'm passing it guest credentials. So these are the encrypted credentials to log into this virtual machine, and giving it, a test IP, a test network, and a test gateway, and then defining, the tests that I want to run against this virtual machine. So I want to run a ping test, and I also want to run the MS SQL Server test, which basically checks for the existence of the SQL Server service, because it is running a SQL Server on here. And that's really all there is to the config of everything. The environment JSON file really is just going to say, where's my Rubrik server? How do I log into it? Where's my VMware server? How do I log into it? Right? There's nothing else really special about that. The main sort of file is this build.ps1. I should mention too, there's a commandlet that you can run within the backup validation module that will create all of this stuff for you as well. You don't need to know how to create the JSON yourself. It can create all this with prompts and different things as well. So I'll look at the build.ps1 and start at the bottom here because this is kind of how this is laid out. We can see the different tasks that it's going to run. Right? It's going to go ahead, get the config, connect to Rubrik and VMware. It's going to create a live mount, validate the live mount. It's going to go ahead and validate that VMware tools is running within that live mount. It's going to validate that we can execute remote scripts because that's how it changes the IP of the virtual machine. Then it's going to move it to our test network, so that VM network I had defined, and it's going to go ahead and change the IP or the network IP address for the virtual machine. Then it runs live mount test, which is essentially going to go ahead and run the defined tests that we had. So we had ping and MS SQL. So we can look at the code here, but essentially it's just PowerShell code, which is running the, if I find, where are we here? The invoke VM script commandlet. So it's just basically running different commands into the VM in order to change the network and do different things like that. The tests that it runs are all defined within this test.ps1 folder. So we can see we have a ping test here, which just runs the test connection. We have a test called port 80, which will go ahead and make sure that the virtual machine's listening on port 80 if it happens to be a web server or something like that. And then we have our MS SQL server, which is going ahead and running the get service commandlet on the VM to make sure that we have that SQL Server service running. So this is where the tests are all defined, and you can just add and remove your own as you see fit if you want to personalize it to your environment. So we'll jump into PowerShell here. I always like to run this with a splat just because it helps me sort of see all the parameters at once. So you could just run it, and pass a dash file, dash environment file. But basically what we're going to do is we're going to, specify the file we want to run because it does use the invoke build module. That's how it was built to run all this stuff. So we're going to specify our build.ps1 file. We're going to tell it where that environment file is, which has our credentials for Rubrik and VMware. We're going to go ahead and pass it the config, and then we're going to pass it, a path to a folder that contains all of those encrypted credentials that we have. So we'll run that. So that'll basically assign all those variables, and then we'll just hit invoke build, and it'll go through and do its thing. So if you remember all of sort of those tasks, we can see them happening now. So grabbing the config, jumping in and connecting to the Rubrik cluster. We can see it jumping in here and connecting to our virtual vCenter. And then it's actually ran the command already to create that live mount. So we can see the live mount is already powered on. So it's already been created. It's already powered on. And while this waits for the guest tools to pop up, we can go and have a look within Rubrik and see what that looks like. So if we go to live mounts and vSphere VMs, we can see our live mount right here. It's already powered on. By the way, when you restore something with a live mount, you can always storage vMotion that back to your production data store. So what this does is allow you to get up and running really quickly, give your users access, and then you can restore and storage vMotion that back to your data store. You can also storage vMotion it directly from within the Rubrik platform as well. If we take a look at VMware here, we can see our LM test VM. So this is the live mount that's running on that Rubrik data store. And it's already booted up and good to go. You can see the storage here is Rubrik and then a big GUID. This is that NFS data store that it creates when it does a live mount. So we'll jump back, see where we are here, because this does take a little bit of time depending on what you're doing. So it's gone through, it's changed the IP to our test IP, run a verify on that IP to make sure it actually worked, connected it to the proper virtual network that we specified. And now it's going through and it's doing the ping test for us. And now it's getting through onto the MS SQL Server. So we could see ping succeeded. So it is available on the network. And now the SQL Server one has succeeded. So we could see a message here. We ran 19 tasks, had 0 warnings, and it's essentially took 2 minutes and change. And as you've seen there, our virtual machine just disappeared because obviously it's cleaned up after itself. So there's no more live mounts available there. So if I jump back here, get to the proper slide, as we could see, we just saw sort of that complete backup validation process is pretty easily, automated with Rubrik. And you can run this against, a whole bunch of all of your virtual machines. And we even have a separate process up on build.rubrik.com for SQL Server, if you're a big SQL shop, which will do a live mount of a database, and then it runs, DBCC, check DB on it, and basically validates on a database level that everything's sort of recoverable. So hopefully this has, triggered some thoughts in your head, and you're starting to think about some of the things that you can automate within your environment. And I just want to sort of help give people a boost and maybe help them get started and talk to people about how you can really get started automating with Rubrik as well. Firstly, the biggest thing is build.rubrik.com. This is our landing page for all things APIs and automation, right? This is where you're going to download all of those SDKs, the integrations, explore all of those use cases that we've developed. Every project on Build, like I mentioned, comes with complete documentation, quick start guides, and getting started videos. And, this really makes that barrier to entry really, really low. So whether, you're a seasoned DevOps veteran or you're just getting started with APIs, Build really has something for everyone. And I want to mention here that it doesn't necessarily have to be Rubrik related either to take advantage of Build. We have a fun project up there, and we can see it under the use cases. It's called Roxy. And Roxy is essentially a chat bot which can be integrated, into Slack. It's built with AWS, Lex, and Lambda, and it's really a neat little project that can help you get started consuming APIs. So what it does is essentially allows you to, direct message a bot within Slack, so think, you could talk to Roxy and ask her questions about your Rubrik cluster. So you can ask her things like, what's the latest backup for this VM? Or how are my SLAs doing? How much storage have I used? How much archive storage am I using in the cloud, right? Things like that. And Roxy will go ahead and send those queries out to Rubrik, grab the information, and then reply back to you right within Slack. So while this example uses Rubrik, you could definitely follow these instructions and consume any API that you want. I've personally cloned the project to connect to VMware APIs, so I can ask my VMware environment about things like rogue snapshots or data store capacities. Really, the use cases are most certainly endless. And I call Rubrik Build a community, and that's because it is, right? It's not just build.rubrik.com. It's really a community that we're building around automation, and we'd love to have y'all in it with us. So you can see the bit.ly link that's shown there. You can head to that link, enter in the token. The token is build, super secret, right? And this will allow you to join our Slack workspace. And here we have a ton of folks that we interact with. We have Rubrik engineers in here. We have product managers, certainly the DevRel teams in there, a ton of different customers and automation experts. And basically, it's really just a big community built around automation and APIs. And we'd love for you to jump in and join the conversations. So with that, I'm done with the slides, and I'll see if we have any questions here. But if we don't get to yours today, definitely, I'll try and get a copy of them and reach out. But if you want to reach out to me, my email and Twitter are there, as well as my GitHub. Just find me on the internet. You can find me anywhere really at MW Preston. So thank you very much, and I'll see if I can find the questions.
Yeah, great presentation, Mike. Really enjoyed the demo. Thank you so much. So much
No
valuable
problem.
information there. Um, we got a lot of good questions coming in. Let's see. First one I see here from Avery, who asks if Rubrik does any sort of integration or connection to other types of cloud services, such as Salesforce, or is it primarily IT systems?
Are we looking to back up Salesforce? I would assume that's probably the question. And currently, we do not. It's definitely on the radar. I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Okay. Nice. And another question here from Douglas, who's asking about what sort of training is available. This is actually something you and I were chatting about before the webinar. What kind of training does Rubrik offer for new clients or existing clients who want to improve their skills?
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. There's a ton of different training available on Rubrik University. If you just go and Google that. We also have our certification as well, the RCSA, which is the Rubrik Certified Systems Administrator. Um, and then, we have a ton of different training that we're currently building, which we're going to put on the website, which is really just sort of demos of how to do different things. And aside from that, we also have what we call RCF, which is a hands-on lab type environment that we're building for those that want to take it for a test drive before putting it into their infrastructure. So there's a ton of different training, a ton of different courses. Local SEs will have all that information for sure.
Excellent. And then Rodney's asking about, say you had a ransomware attack, and he's asking if you would have to rebuild vCenter before you can perform the live mount that you demonstrated. And then second part, is there a way to back up vCenter and then quickly spin it back up with Rubrik?
Certainly, absolutely. That's a great question because it's sort of that chicken egg scenario. But definitely, if your vCenter was affected by that ransomware attack, then we definitely have to get a vCenter up first. We do back up vCenters, so the VCSA, we do back that up on image level. VMware recently, though, have really been pushing their file level backup for vCenter. So, while I've done a restore of our VCSA hundreds of times, it works. It's probably the quickest way to get back up. VMware is probably going to tell you to go and deploy the new one and point it to your file level backup, which, we can go and scrape that file level backup from somewhere and back that up. But we most certainly support, backing up and restoring vCenter. We can, restore to a standalone host as well. So if you have another host in the environment, we can restore your vCenter to that. We don't need vCenter to perform the restore, I guess would be the question around that. And speaking of ransomware, I mentioned our immutability. I should make a point of saying, because we do have Rubrik Polaris, which is a SaaS offering, and what we're doing there is on top of our core sort of backup product, we're building new applications. And the first one that come out is something called Radar. So when we take a Rubrik backup, we generate a ton of metadata around, we understand sort of, what's inside that backup, who has access to it, things like that. And we use that metadata to power these additional applications that we're building. And what Radar does is it uses AI and ML, and it can really take, last night's backup and, your most recent backup, and it can take a look at those and sort of compare and learn any differences. So if it detects, ransomware signatures or, a crazy amount of files got encrypted, we can identify that for you and provide really, really fast recovery, to bring those back. And, they're always going to be able to be recoverable because we have that immutable file system. So kind of answering two questions in one there.
Excellent. Yeah, absolutely. This question they're asking, does Rubrik offer any certificate? I'm guessing they mean certifications.
Yep, definitely. The Rubrik Certified Systems Administrator would be our certification right now. It's relatively new. I think it's about 6 months old. I know we have I've just heard of a few people passing recently, so we definitely have a certification that you can use or write, and a course that goes along with that as well.
Nice. And then Douglas is asking, over time as new hardware is released, new storage, new appliances, how does that work with Rubrik if you need to upgrade your Rubrik brick at some point?
Yeah, we definitely can. You can mix and match sort of those brick types. So if you want to upgrade, we can refresh the appliance, and essentially goes in, and the data all gets merged and spread out, and then you sort of take out the other nodes. That's a great question as well, because we do offer um, subscription-based licensing as well, and that's even for the on-prem appliances, like the physical hardware as well. So every 3 years or 5 years, you get a hardware refresh with that. So we definitely have the ability to migrate between platforms, different things like that.
Excellent. And that really points out this question here from Ned, who's asking about how licensing works with disaster recovery. If you had a primary and a secondary and maybe a tertiary site, are those licensed individually, or is it licensed based on the amount of data, or how does that work?
It's essentially licensed for what we call per node, per capacity. So we sell, different sized nodes in our bricks. So each brick has essentially 4 nodes, usually. And, depending on how much storage you want in there, you buy bigger or smaller nodes, and then you add nodes on top of that. So that's how it's licensed. We do have a disaster recovery solution called AppFlows, which we talked about, which is coming very, very shortly, which is a bit of a different licensing model as well. I can't really talk too much about that, but it's definitely it's more of a subscription type, I guess, model to that play.
Got it. Okay. Next question. How can Rubrik help me with minimizing or limiting data sprawl?
That's a good question. It's not really going to help you minimize it. We can definitely help you detect it. I mentioned Radar, which is our ransomware sort of ransomware play, where we can detect and different things like ransomware. The second application we released on Polaris is called Sonar, and Sonar is really a data governance solution. So we can see, since we know all about that data, we can detect, what that data is, who has access to that data. Now, currently, Sonar is really a play around data governance, right? If you want to check to make sure there's no credit card numbers, on certain VMs, or you want to check, if you have social security numbers sitting around somewhere, that's sort of the play Sonar is now. You could definitely utilize it, though, because you can create your own signatures to detect, what data is where, and then you could take action to remove it manually after that. We're not going to go ahead and automatically remove any data, so we can help you detect data sprawl. We don't really provide an automated mitigation to that, just to be on the safe side, really.
Got it. Okay. Sure. And then interesting question here from Gilbert, who asks, what's the biggest stumbling block when starting automation? Is it due to a set of assumptions or failure to ask some critical question? What have you seen out there, Mike?
Oh, that's a really good question. And honestly, I would say in my experiences, the biggest stumbling block is either lack of support from what you're trying to automate, or lack of documentation. So either the solution doesn't support automation at all, and I've ran into this, during that provisioning process I talked about when we deployed, VMware out to the schools. Obviously it's more than just VMware. We had to, add all of those solutions into our backup solution, add them all into our IPAM, and it touches a lot of things, and I got about 90% of the way done and realized there's absolutely no way for me to add these VMs into our monitoring solution, which, if you're an automation junkie, that really sucks, because I had to stop and I had to go manually do that. And I screwed up, honestly. probably about half of them, right? And that's just my nature. I'm going to do that if I have to do that manually. So, there was no support, no proprietary clean, nothing in order to automate them into our monitoring solution. So, when that software refresh came along, I really sat down and thought long and hard, and we purchased a new solution which supported automation. So it's definitely lack of support, but the second is going to be documentation. Like, it's all great if you can or if you support APIs, you support all this stuff. If you have no documentation to back that up, nobody's going to automate around your solution. So the stuff you can't just guess, what's supposed to go into an API request. It's pretty hard. So
Right. Okay, good advice. And then next question, can we use Rubrik on all major cloud platforms?
absolutely, yeah. We provide integration for Cloud Archive. So that's our ability to archive data off to the cloud to AWS, Azure, Google, and obviously on-prem object storage if you happen to have that. We also have the ability to take that archive data and spin up a cloud instance from it. So leverage that data that's already in the cloud. And we support that on AWS and Azure, not GCP at the moment. And then we have, a third sort of cloud integration where we protect your data that's running in the cloud. So your AWS EC2 instances, your Azure VMs, your GCP instances, right? So we support all three cloud providers there, along with things like RDS in AWS, Azure SQL, and then SaaS products as well. So Microsoft Office 365, right? We support backing up your mailboxes and OneDrive and Calendar and Teams and all of that stuff.
Nice. Yeah, a lot of different options there. Excellent. Let's see. Another question that came in. They're asking about when it comes to backup validation, what other critical use cases do you see customers solving with automation besides backup, just validating that the backups are there?
Yeah, absolutely. Backup validation seems like the most common for a data protection company, and it's used pretty widely. But our customers come up with some wild and crazy things in order to use APIs. I get a lot of great questions from customers all the time. So, I see things like Roxy, that chatbot, being integrated for users to be able to DM something and say, what, give me a copy of my virtual machine. That way they don't have to go to the backup admin to do that. They could do that right from within Slack, since they're in there anyways. We also see a ton of use cases around reporting. We provide a ton of reports in the solution itself, but you always want to integrate that maybe into your own reporting solution. There's a project out there called the As Built report, which is a great project. I recommend checking it out if you can. It's built by Tim Carman in Australia, and he built it just because he needed a way to generate nice documentation for his VMware environment, and he's since expanded that out. And you can run sort of a PowerShell script which will generate documentation on your VMware environment. We definitely have a plugin for the Rubrik CDM environment, and it all kind of looks uniform and the same, and it's a really, really slick use case. I definitely recommend checking that out if you have the need to document anything in your environment, for sure.
Very cool. Well, I'm afraid we're running out of time here in our webinar presentation window, but I love the live demo, all the excellent information around automation, and our lengthy Q&A here. We answered a lot of questions from the audience. Mike, it's been great having you on. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's definitely great to be here, and thanks everybody for the questions. It's always great when there's a ton of questions. I love it.
Awesome. And thank you to Rubrik, of course, for supporting the event today. Make sure that you check out the handouts tab there. The Rubrik Gorilla Guide is available for download. It's a full ebook. You can check that out and read it after today's webinar. So don't forget to get that one before you go. And finally, of course, visit Rubrik.com and especially build.rubrik.com for more information. Mike has also put up his contact information right there on the slide if you have additional questions. Finally, I want to announce the winner of our Amazon $300 gift card that's going out to Avery Cloutier from California. Congratulations to Avery from California. We'll reach out to you to deliver that gift card, and we'll also be contacting our Best Question Prize winner after the event today. Thank you to everyone for joining the event. Hope you learned a lot, and have a great day. Bye-bye.